Hello and thank you for joining us. My name is Sheen. Here with me today is Eurasia analyst Eugene Chausovsky to talk about the conflict between Russia and the West across the Eurasian landmass. So Eugene, you authored our most recent series, 5-part series, on the nature of the confrontation and the standoff between Russia and the West that's existed effectively for 1,000 years. In the series, you looked at it through the prism of a 25-year forecast. What was your thinking behind doing that?
Well, basically, as 2015 was coming to an end, and as we're getting into 2016 now, it's been 25 years now since the collapse of the Soviet Union and the birth of 15 new countries, essentially, across the former Soviet landscape. So now, as we're looking ahead, I thought that it would be a good idea to take the long view of things. What are the next 25 years going to be like? These last 25 years have been quite dynamic for many of these countries, so it's interesting to kind of consider what the next 25 years could look like in this area.
And it's interesting because clearly there's a conflict now that everyone's very focused on, but it's been going on for some time. What are some of the main points that you actually discovered as you were going through writing and preparing the series?
Well, it's interesting because this, as you mentioned before, this conflict has been happening, or this standoff, the collision, whatever you want to call it, has been happening in some form for the last 1,000 years, ever since Russia emerged as an organized state under Kievan Rus. So the area of Russia, what makes up now modern-day Ukraine and Belarus, ever since that entity emerged, it has been in conflict or in collision in some way with the West. This has, of course, evolved over time with different technologies, with different political alliances, but it's always existed in one form or another. Once the Soviet Union collapsed, this created an entirely new dynamic with these new independent countries, some of them which chose to align with Russia, some of which chose to align with the West, and others which have remained neutral more or less. So in looking at the next 25 years, it's a long-term forecast, right? So there's not a lot of quantitative or statistical data that's available to really look that far ahead, other than demographic projections, which are, of course, not perfect, and they're going to be subject to some variations. But one of the key elements that I came across was basically the entire Orthodox world of the former Soviet Union is facing a significant demographic decline over this time period, and that in turn will shape a lot of the political, a lot of the geopolitical relationships in this area as well.
So what sort of decline are you talking about? Because clearly, as Russia's power has waned and its empire has shrunk down, the ability to influence directly countries on their doorstep has declined as well. And it seems like actually one of the techniques they've used is by exercising soft power and the force of Russian culture, language, and tradition. Is that something you see gradually sort of waning over the next 25 years?
Absolutely. And with Russia's demographic decline, they're projected to lose about 10% of their population by 2050, which is a significant amount. So that in turn will translate into its ability to project military power, in its ability to sustain its economy. And at the same time, the generational turnover, essentially, since the collapse of the Soviet Union, you're going to have more and more people that are being born that have no experience, no memory, no recollection at all of the Soviet period, which means that the Russian language as a lingua franca across the former Soviet Union will certainly decrease, which means that social, cultural ties will also weaken over time, especially in some of the countries that are not Orthodox, that are not European, so countries like Central Asia, some of the countries in the Caucasus. This is happening simultaneously as countries around the former Soviet Union, countries like Turkey, Iran, these are facing demographic increases, just as Russia is decreasing. So certainly Russia will be facing both hard power and soft power challenges across the former Soviet periphery.
Well, certainly looking forward then, I mean, is Russia then completely out of the game? Are they still going to be a credible player 25 years from now in Central Asia?
Right. Well, I don't think that Russia is completely out of the game. They've been in the game for the last 1,000 years. They've faced some significant setbacks, some significant challenges over history, looking at the collapse of the Russian Empire, for example. Then that gave birth to the Soviet Union, which itself collapsed, about 25 years ago. And even in those difficult periods, there was a lot of upheaval that did offer opportunities for other powers to come in, but Russia was able to regain a lot of its momentum. Of course, this is happening now in a very different circumstances with the demographic issues that I've mentioned before. So it will certainly pose a big challenge, but Russia will continue to be a player in the region, but I think over 25 years it will be a weaker one.
Absolutely. Well, Eugene, thank you so much for taking the time to explain this to me today. If you haven't done so already, then I definitely encourage you to read Eugene's 5-part series on the Russia-West standoff, currently on site, stratfor.com. Thank you.